All right, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. You're stuck with me for class as well, so hopefully that's a blessing rather than a curse. Okay, so good morning again. Um, so today's class we're going to talk about on God's timing. So real quick, I want you to think of a time where you were either praying for something very very eagerly and um, very steadily. You were praying for something, or you just really wanted something to happen. Like maybe you were looking for a job or something along those lines, or waiting to, maybe you're waiting to have children, whatever it may be. Think of a time that you really wanted something from God, a blessing, and it just didn't happen right away. If you feel comfortable, you can share that story. Or if you don't feel comfortable sharing the story, just kind of share, what your mindset was going through that, and what did you find helped you the most in those situations where, you were working on God's timing rather than yours. Yes, sir. Made a mess of it. Absolutely. I mean, whenever we think that we're in control of the situation, obviously there's somebody. Um, they say that there's always somebody smarter than you, right? That's something that I hear pretty often from my twin brother. There's always somebody smarter than you, but um, in the case of us working with God, there's always a being smarter and more powerful than you are. And I don't say that to discredit anybody in here, because I'm sure everybody in here is very smart and very prepared for anything that happens in life. But whenever we try to take control of situations and kind of take that wheel over from God when He's trying to drive, and we're trying to drive from the passenger seat, we're going to swerve off the road. And that's kind of what ends up happening sometimes, because we try to fix everything ourselves. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah.
Prayed for years before God finally, showed me another path. But I think what helped me to think about the times before when I had to wait, and it wasn't it was on His time and not mine, and it worked out. And so I guess that just helped me to think about those times before that it worked out, but it was on His time and not mine. So
Yeah.
when it wasn't working out like I thought it should, just wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we've talked about that some, and I can, I can say this summer, I chose to stay home instead of pursuing an internship. And you would not believe how hard it is for somebody to get a job right now. I mean, nobody is hiring, but I just know that this is part of God's work. It can definitely get frustrating at times, and there's times where you may get to the point where you cannot stand the situation that you're in. Whether you're at a job that you don't like, whether you can't find a job, whether you're, whatever the situation may be. But just knowing, having that patience and that ability to kind of look in the rear view and see this was all part of a plan. I was meant to be in this situation. This taught me a few great lessons, and now I'm in a great point in life where I can use what I've learned. And this was really a great thing for me. So, absolutely, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah. hmm Yeah, just being grateful for the presence of God in our lives. I mean, God's been with us so far. And like I said, being able to have that ability to kind of look in the rear view and say, here's where God was affecting my life. Here's where He kind of stepped in when I really needed Him to. Having peace with that is so important. And being grateful is so important, because that gives us all the ability to say, you're in the driver's seat. I'm just going on your timing. I don't need anything to do with it. So yes, absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Sorry for a second comment.
No.
But, as you were mentioning, where things may work out great, and it's all from perspective.
Yeah.
Because in Philippians 11 through 13, Paul reminds us of being content with where we're at. And so then think about when he was in prison, right? Not the greatest of places.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was content and he worshiped God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's the thing of wherever he puts us, he needs us.
Absolutely.
Right. And so being content in that, regardless of what the world may say, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah. And, maybe I'm in this spot where I need to learn a lesson. Maybe I'm in this spot because it's going to help me more down the road. Being content with where we're at, that's what was part of the reason that God let Paul out of prison. He continued to be content. He continued to praise God in everything that he did. And so when we look at this idea of being on God's timing, it's really all about peace and patience and faith and knowing that God has a plan for us, even though as human nature, we want to be in control. We want to have the wheel. I know sometimes whenever my beautiful fiance is driving us around, I like to say, okay, we need to brake a little bit quicker, or let's speed up a little bit more. You got to turn here. I think a lot of us can kind of say we might be a passenger seat or a backseat driver every once in a while, but whenever I need to work on that. But whenever God is in the driver's seat, we need to make sure that we're not being that passenger seat driver. We need to make sure that we are on his timing. So let's get into the scripture. Genesis chapter 17. Let's go there. Abraham and Sarah is the first. Oh, let me grab the clicker. I don't know where I left it. Will you advance the slide for me up there? Thank you. Genesis 17, 15 through 21. I completely forgot that I made a PowerPoint for this. So let's read. Verse 15. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah. Thank you. It was on the other side. Just got to look around a little bit more. But Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. God said, no, but Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. So Abraham, as we can see, is in such disbelief of what God has just told him. He falls on his face and he starts laughing. And if I were him, I'd probably be dying laughing. I'm 100 years old. You think I can have a baby? My wife's 90. You think she can have a baby? Absolutely not. But anything is possible when we're talking to God. And so even though this may seem impossible to Abraham at this time, he's going to learn rather quickly that he needs to dial it back just a little bit. And just to kind of go back and kind of hint on this, Sarah was, barren. She couldn't have any children. So whenever God said that he would make a covenant through Abraham, whenever God said that Abraham would be a father of many nations. He's like, well, how are you going to do that? I can't have any kids. Like, what are we going to do? So he has a child with Hagar, his servant, and it ends up to where he tries to put the situation in his hands, very foolishly, I might add. But God still has understanding with Abraham and still blesses Ishmael. So even though Abraham tried to take the wheel, he tried to take the driver's seat, God still gave him forgiveness. And that's something that I think means a lot in our stories. Because whenever we try to take the wheel, whenever we try to take control, we can still lean on God and he will still provide forgiveness for us and even make something beautiful out of the mistakes that we have made. So that's something that has stood out to me right there. But continuing on with this story here, in verse 24 of chapter 17, Abraham gets circumcised at 99 years old because God told him that's what he needs to do in order to have a child. And so you may look at this, and typically a baby boy gets circumcised at birth because that's how we do things. And that's how it was set up in the Bible. If there's a scriptural reason behind that, someone could come up to me and tell me that, because I didn't look into that. It might have been foolish of me. But as it has been set in place, a young man gets circumcised at birth. But he got circumcised at 99 years old, towards the end of his life, because that's what God told him to do. Even though it may have seemed pointless to him, or it may have seemed pointless to someone else, they still have faith that God was making the right decision. And that's what God told them to do. And so they did it. And so God comes to Abraham again soon after this and explains to him the same thing, but with Sarah next to him as well. You may have to flip over a page, but chapter 18, verse 9 through 15, they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh." Sarah denies the Lord, or laughs in the face of the Lord, because she thought that it was impossible. I don't know if y'all have ever had a situation like this happen, but maybe your 3 or 4-year-old child comes up to you and they say, "Mom, Dad, I think I want to do the dishes tonight after dinner. Do you think I can do the dishes?" And you'll probably laugh in their face and say, "Sure you can," but they can't even reach the sink to turn the water on. Or they may say, "Let me vacuum the house for you." They can't even push the thing around. They laugh because it seems impossible. It seems like there's not enough power there to do what needs to be done. And I love the response here by God in verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? No. The simple answer is no. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. But even in the midst of their disbelief, they still did what God commanded. And he blessed them in chapter 21 with Isaac. And so this made me think, whenever we are in disbelief, I'd like to talk about this for just a little bit. When we are in disbelief, how can we believe in God even if we think that what is going on is impossible? Yes, ma'am.
Think about previous times where he came through prayer and that he's been there for us.
Yeah. Look at the previous times in our lives that he's answered prayers, that he's been there for us. Think about the previous times throughout the Bible that he's done things like that. Absolutely. What else?
Faith.
What's that?
Faith.
Faith. Absolutely. We have to have faith, because if we don't have faith, then what's the point? What's the point of even asking God for anything? What's the point of praying to God for anything? What's the point if we do not have faith that it will happen? Absolutely. Anything else to add on to that before we move on?
To realize the power of the one that nothing is impossible for God.
Yeah.
I think we get used to dealing with people and circumstances that can always let us down and don't always have our best interests in heart. Just to know that when it comes to spiritual matters and even things of this earth, that we're trusting God for, he's got all power and he can work it out.
Yeah.
Like you said, despite we might mess it up as we go along. God,
Yeah.
God can and will take care of it.
Absolutely. And, I love that, because as humans, we make those types of mistakes all the time. Some people have a reputation where they just aren't dependable at all. And we have to deal with people like that all the time. People who make mistakes. Like just the other day, I accidentally missed a dentist appointment. That wasn't necessarily like important to anybody, but if it had been like, I don't know, maybe someone in my family had something very important that they were going to, and I needed to be there, and I just missed it, that affects people. And so whenever we look at ourselves and look at the people around us and think like, I don't know how I could depend on God whenever these people around me are so not reliable. But we look at God and he's always reliable. We can always depend on him. We can always ask him for whatever we need. And so that is what is so great about God, is that he's not who we're dealing with every single day. He is much greater. So thank you very much for that comment. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And that goes back to what Mr. Mark was saying, is being content with where we are in life. And sometimes it's not all about like, I'm not receiving what I need at all. We could be receiving it later. We could be, it could be something else that we need. We just didn't realize it because, obviously God is much smarter and wiser than we are. It could be any one of those things. Realizing that God is not against us. He wants the best for us. And that's something that we need to realize over and over again, and having peace with the fact that we need to let him have that control. For the sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on so we have plenty of time to talk about everything else. But I'm loving these comments so far. Flip over a few pages. Genesis will be in chapter 39 in just a moment. Genesis 37 through 50 tell the entire story of Joseph. We won't read those chapters, but we can go through and kind of give a summary and think about this for just a second. Chapters 37 and 38 go through the story of Joseph, his upbringing, coat of many colors, He has the dreams where his brothers will end up bowing down to him, and they get very frustrated with that. They see him as the golden child, and they think, we need to get rid of this guy. We can't take it anymore. And so they throw him in a pit. He gets found. He gets sold into slavery. But fortunately, he ends up with Potiphar. And Potiphar treats him very, very well. So much so that he promotes him to one of the greatest positions in his house. And I don't know if this was some form of jealousy by Potiphar's wife. I don't know what the direct motives were behind this, besides just if it was genuinely just attraction to him, whatever it may have been. But in chapter 39, we see the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So let's start in verse 6. Starting in verse 6 of chapter 39, Genesis 39. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her to lie beside her or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. And see, this was very unfortunate for Joseph because he had done everything right. But, Potiphar's wife, I guess she just got mad because she got rejected. She wanted to change the story for Joseph. And this is very clear that this was all part of God's plan. As we move forward, let's go to chapter 41. So the first half of chapter 41, a little bit more than half, Joseph is in prison and he interprets some of Pharaoh's dreams. Chapter 40, he interprets two prisoners' dreams. And while he's in prison, he interprets the baker and the chief cupbearer, their dreams. And so he tells them what's going to happen. He says the baker is going to be hanged, and he says that the cupbearer is going to be restored. And so after that, of course, he says in verse 21 of chapter 40, he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgave him. And forgot him. Joseph asked him to remember him. But as we look at chapter 41, we see that Pharaoh is having some dreams here. And he goes to Joseph to interpret these dreams. And in verse 25, it says, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are also 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the wind, the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do." So there's going to be a famine. And Pharaoh brings Joseph in. He puts him at a very high position as well. And he helps him prepare for the famine. They take a lot of grain and store it away, and they begin to sell it. And then at this point, in chapter 42, Joseph's brothers go to Egypt because, they needed food. So they go to buy some food, and they see Joseph, but they didn't know that it was Joseph at the time. And so they ask him to bring back the youngest brother because Jacob wanted the youngest brother to stay with him so that he wouldn't lose. If anybody died, he just didn't want his youngest son to die, and so on. And then in chapter 43, they return to Egypt. Chapter 44, Joseph tests them by putting the silver cup into the bag, so they have to come back. And then we get to chapter 46, verses 28 through 34. And a good bit happens in between there, but what we were really focusing on is the full reuniting of Joseph and his family. So chapter 46, verse 28. He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, and know that you are still alive." Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who are in the land of Canaan have come to me." And we can actually stop there in verse 32. This is kind of a full circle moment because everybody is working on God's timing. Jacob, aka Israel, is now able to see his son Joseph, who he loved so much. He's now able to finally spend more time with him. And he says that he is content with dying now that he has seen his son. And so we look at that story and we see that God's timing was fulfilled in one sense, but then we see Joseph, and he's brought up to be one of the most powerful people in Egypt, but he continuously uses that for good. He treats his brothers who treated him so poorly. He treats them with love and care and passion. And all of this works towards God's timing being fulfilled. And so we kind of think about the stumbling blocks that Joseph had when he was, going through this stage of his life. And one thing that really stood out to me that kind of stopped his whole story, kind of stifled it, is the fact that the cupbearer forgot Joseph. If he didn't, he could have been out of prison so much quicker, but he had to stay there for another year or 2 years. I think it was just a year. After 2 years. Okay, so it was 2 years. I just want to make sure I got that right. Sorry about that. But what the question came to mind is that how can we stay patient when it seems like we have been forgotten about, like the cupbearer did to Joseph? How can we stay patient in those moments?
Remember that God is still working.
Absolutely. And that's kind of like what I said this morning. Every breath that we take should be an indication that God's not finished with us yet. Every breath that we take means the story is not over. There's still time. God can still work with us. What else?
Read all the stories in the Bible and how every different scenario almost that you can think of
Yeah,
and how the Lord can
absolutely. Absolutely. God has been doing this for a long time. A long time. It's like if you just get to work and there's someone who's been there for 28 years as opposed to you just getting there, somebody's going to do it a little bit better because he's been there for 28 years and you just started, right? So God's been doing this for a long time and he will fulfill everything that we need. We just have to have faith in him. We just have to be patient and know that he will bless us because we are having that faith in him. And I took a little bit too long going through that. So let's go ahead and go to our third example, which is the story of Hannah. And this is one of my absolute favorite stories in the Bible because whenever we think about our prayer lives, whenever we think about like the passion that we have when we pray, if we're not praying the way that Hannah is praying here, God may look at us and be like, they don't really have faith in me. They don't really need this that bad. The way that Hannah prays to God in this story is so inspiring. So let's start in verse 1. We'll read verses 1 through 3, and then we'll skip down and read verses 9 through 20. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jerahim, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zoph, and an Ephrathite. He had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from the city to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. Sorry, verse 4 as well. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her daughters and sons. Verse 5, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Sorry, I guess I meant to put verse 5. So let's skip down to verse 9. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah arose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord. I will give him to you all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart. Only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord. I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son. And she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. When Hannah prays, she prays with all of her heart. You know, I've heard the saying be said, something along the lines of the greatest medicine is prayer. When things get worse, pray harder. This is exactly what she's going through right now. She has been struggling. She's going through torment. In those verses that we skipped, Penina is just a big bully to her because she just can't grasp, why does he love Hannah more than he loves me? I've given him children, which essentially was, a form of purpose for women in that time, given their spouse children. I gave him children. Why does he love her so much? She is in great torment. They use the word anxiety and vexation. When was the last time you used the word vexation in a sentence? Probably don't use it unless you want to get in trouble. I pray that nobody has to use that word. But she is in this time of she's just struggling. And she says, "Here, have it all. God, I'm giving everything to you right now." And she looked drunk whenever she was praying. And I used to work at a bowling alley, so I saw some drunk people that would bowl, and it's pretty funny. If you ever take a second and look at it, I've seen people like dive like a penguin on the lanes and slide down them. I've seen people do all types of crazy stuff. I don't imagine she was quite doing a belly dive on the lanes whenever she was praying, but she was giving everything. I don't quite know how to put that into perspective, but just imagine somebody who quite literally can't take it anymore. So she just hands it over and she's begging the Lord to listen to her. And with her great faith and with her steady praying, with everything that she gives to the Lord, giving her whole heart, the Lord listens and he blesses her. And so, what can we learn from these stories of people running on God's timing? We need to believe in the Lord. We need to trust in him. We need to pray to him. We need to have faith in him. We need to be patient. We have to have peace with letting go. That can feel so hard sometimes. But the same way that we may have to deal with grief, the same way that we may have to deal with forgiveness, the same way that we may have to deal with different things like that, we need to let go and give God the control. Have peace with the understanding that we don't need to have everything in our hands. There's someone who is much smarter, much wiser, much more powerful. God will watch over us. He will take care of us. He will do whatever we ask of him on his timing, so long as we believe in him, we trust in him, we pray to him, we have faith in him, we're patient and understanding, we let go, we give it to him. And so, as we think about working on God's timing, we just need to understand that he has a plan and it's far greater than ours. We're not working for ourselves. We're working for him. Any final thoughts or comments that you'd like to throw out there? Yes, sir. Yeah.
If we don't wait on him, then we don't trust him to do what he needs to do.
Right. And, trying to take these things into our own grasp, it kind of shows our character. It kind of shows, maybe I'm not fully committed. Maybe I'm still missing a little piece of it if I'm trying to take this into my control. We have to have faith in him. Wait for him. And, yes, sir.
One other thing to think about is like, God the Father did spare his own son. His own son went through a lot of these same things. He went through not understanding really like why he was having to go through this, but not my will, but your will, right?
Yeah.
That's what his prayer was, like the Lord's prayer. A lot of we kind of run a pity party sometimes on ourselves, but God didn't even spare his own son.
Right.
So sometimes we need to think about that. Like, are we really thinking about ourselves too importantly, or are we thinking about that we're worthy or grateful that we get to go through this trial or this sacrifice for Christ?
Right. That's very powerful right there. I love the way you put that. God did not spare his own son. He gave him as a sacrifice for all of us. And having the peace with that, knowing that that sacrifice has wiped us clean so that we have that hope of living in heaven one day. Man, I love the way that you put that. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to use that again. But God did not spare his own son. He gave him for us. And I think that is a great way to be dismissed this morning. Thank you so much.